My name is Stella Morrison, and I'm 24 years old. I was sitting in the University of California financial aid office when my world completely collapsed. The woman behind the desk looked at me with genuine confusion as she repeated the words that made my blood run cold. Your tuition payment has been withdrawn by the account holder. My hands trembled as I dialed my father's number, and his voice came through the speaker like ice water in my veins. I warned you, Stella. Skip your sister's wedding, lose your tuition. Your choice. The email notification on my phone confirmed my worst nightmare, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to discover about my family. Before we dive into this story that changed my life forever, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready for a family drama that'll make your jaw drop. Subscribe and ring that notification bell because trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Now let me tell you exactly how I discovered the dark truth behind my sister's perfect wedding. 3 months before that devastating phone call, I was living what I thought was a normal life as a senior marketing student. My relationship with my family had always been complicated, but nothing prepared me for what I witnessed on that rainy Thursday evening in March. I had returned home unexpectedly early from a study group when I heard familiar laughter coming from the pool house behind our family's sprawling Beverly Hills mansion. What I saw through the slightly open door made my stomach drop to the floor. My sister Brooke, who was supposed to be having her final dress fitting for her upcoming wedding, was locked in a passionate embrace with Benjamin Carter, my ex-boyfriend from 2 years ago. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could have. Benjamin had been my first serious relationship in college, and we had dated for 8 months before he suddenly broke up with me, claiming he needed to focus on his career. Now I understood the real reason behind our breakup. Brooke had her arms wrapped around his neck, whispering sweet promises about their future together while her engagement ring to Harrison Blackwood caught the dim light filtering through the pool house windows. They were discussing plans to disappear together after her wedding ceremony, taking advantage of Harrison's generous financial gifts and then vanishing to start a new life in Mexico. I confronted Brooke the very next morning in her pristine white bedroom that looked more like a bridal magazine spread than a living space. She burst into crocodile tears the moment she saw my face, immediately launching into a sob story about how she never meant for things to go this far. According to her tearful confession, she had fallen in love with Benjamin the moment they met at my birthday party 2 years ago, and everything that happened afterward was just fate bringing them together. She begged me to keep her secret, claiming that our family would lose everything if the Blackwood family discovered her infidelity before the wedding could secure the business merger that our father desperately needed. The truth about our family's financial situation came pouring out during that confrontation. Our father, Richard Morrison, had built his real estate empire on increasingly risky investments and shady business deals that were finally catching up with him. The Morrison Corporation was on the verge of bankruptcy, and the only thing standing between our family and complete financial ruin was the marriage alliance with the Blackwood family. Harrison Blackwood's father controlled the largest development project on the West Coast, and their partnership would inject $200 million into our family business through exclusive development rights. My mother, Linda Morrison, discovered us arguing in Brooke's room and immediately took her eldest daughter's side without even listening to my concerns. In her mind, I was nothing more than a jealous younger sister who couldn't stand seeing Brooke achieve the kind of success and happiness that had always eluded me. Linda had always favored Brooke, treating her like a precious china doll while expecting me to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention remained. She accused me of trying to sabotage the wedding out of pure spite, and when I tried to explain what I had witnessed, she dismissed my claims as lies born from jealousy and resentment. The final straw came when I announced my decision not to attend the wedding, citing my inability to support a union built on deception and betrayal. My father's reaction was swift and brutal. He cornered me in his mahogany-paneled study, surrounded by awards and photos documenting his rise from a small-town nobody to a real estate mogul, and delivered his ultimatum with the cold efficiency of a business negotiation. Either I would attend Brooke's wedding with a smile on my face and keep my mouth shut about whatever I thought I had seen, or I could kiss my college education goodbye and figure out how to support myself without any help from the Morrison family. Richard Morrison didn't make empty threats, and within 48 hours of our confrontation, I discovered just how far his influence extended into every corner of my life. A private investigator named Marcus Webb began following me everywhere I went, from my morning classes to my evening study sessions at the library. He made no effort to hide his presence, sitting in his black sedan outside my dormitory and taking photos whenever I tried to meet with friends or potential allies. When I attempted to approach Harrison Blackwood at a charity gala to tell him the truth about his bride-to-be, Marcus appeared out of nowhere and physically blocked my path, claiming he was security hired by the Blackwood family for their protection. My mother launched her own psychological warfare campaign against me, systematically destroying my relationships and reputation within our social circle. Linda called every single one of my friends, professors, and acquaintances with a carefully crafted story about my recent mental health struggles and emotional instability. According to her version of events, I was experiencing a severe psychological breakdown triggered by jealousy over my sister's engagement, and any claims I might make about family secrets should be dismissed as the desperate fabrications of someone who needed professional help. She even went so far as to contact my academic advisor, expressing her deep concern about my ability to handle the stress of my final semester. The poisonous whisper campaign worked exactly as Linda had intended. My best friend Emma started avoiding my calls and making excuses whenever I tried to make plans to spend time together. My study group members began leaving me out of their sessions, and even my favorite professor, Dr. Andrews, pulled me aside after class to suggest that I might benefit from taking a medical leave of absence to focus on my emotional well-being. The isolation was suffocating, and I began to understand how effectively my family could destroy my entire support system when they felt threatened by my defiance. Meanwhile, Brooke and Benjamin continued their secret relationship with increasing boldness, secure in the knowledge that I had been neutralized as a threat to their plans. They began meeting at expensive hotels and restaurants around the city, acting like any other couple madly in love while Brooke continued to play the role of Harrison's devoted fiancé. I discovered through my own detective work that they had already applied for passports under assumed names and made reservations at a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas for the week immediately following the wedding ceremony. The financial pressure on me intensified when I discovered that my father had not only frozen my personal bank account but had also contacted my part-time employer at a local boutique to have me fired. His excuse was that the Morrison family name could not be associated with retail work, as it would damage our reputation during such an important business negotiation. I was forced to take a job at a small coffee shop near campus, working early morning shifts that interfered with my class schedule, just to afford basic necessities like food and gas for my car. Professor Andrews approached me again after my second week of missing his advanced marketing seminar, but this time his tone was more ominous than concerned. He informed me that someone had called the university administration to question my academic performance and suggest that my grades might have been inflated due to my family's substantial donations to the business school. A formal review of my transcripts had been ordered, and there was a possibility that some of my previous coursework might need to be repeated if any irregularities were discovered. The walls were closing in from every direction, and I began to realize that my family's power and influence reached far beyond what I had ever imagined. Richard Morrison had spent decades building a network of contacts, favors, and obligations that could be leveraged to destroy anyone who threatened his carefully constructed empire. My mother possessed a talent for psychological manipulation that would have impressed trained interrogators, and together they formed a formidable team capable of isolating and neutralizing any opposition to their plans. The coffee shop where I had found refuge became the setting for the most manipulative encounter of my life when Harrison Blackwood appeared at my counter on a busy Friday morning, ordering a simple black coffee while studying me with genuine curiosity and concern. He was exactly the kind of man that any woman would be proud to marry, tall, handsome, intelligent, and wealthy, but without the arrogance that often accompanied such privilege. Harrison had graduated from Harvard Business School and taken over several of his family's philanthropic foundations, dedicating his life to causes that actually made a difference in the world. As he waited for his coffee, he asked me directly why I hadn't been involved in any of the wedding planning activities, expressing genuine disappointment that he hadn't had the opportunity to get to know his future sister-in-law better. I was so close to telling him everything right there in that crowded coffee shop, with the morning rush providing perfect cover for our conversation and no family members anywhere in sight to interfere with my confession. The words were forming on my tongue when Brooke appeared like a guardian angel of deception, sweeping into the shop with her arms full of bridal magazines and a perfectly rehearsed explanation for my absence from family events. According to her impromptu performance, I had been struggling with intense feelings of inadequacy and jealousy ever since her engagement announcement, and my emotional instability had reached the point where our parents felt it was better for everyone if I maintained some distance from the wedding preparations. Brooke's acting skills were absolutely masterful as she wrapped her arms around Harrison's waist and gazed up at him with adoring eyes while simultaneously shooting me warning glances that promised severe consequences if I contradicted her story. She explained to her unsuspecting fiancé that I had always been the troubled child of the family, prone to dramatic outbursts and attention-seeking behavior whenever the spotlight shifted away from me. Her voice carried just the right note of sisterly concern mixed with gentle disappointment as she described my pattern of sabotaging important family events throughout our childhood and teenage years. Harrison listened to this character assassination with growing sympathy for what he perceived as a family struggling to deal with a mentally unstable member. He offered to help pay for therapy sessions or whatever professional treatment I might need, demonstrating the kind of generous spirit that made Brooke's betrayal even more despicable. As they left the coffee shop together, Brooke turned back to mouth the words "keep quiet" while Harrison wasn't looking, reminding me that my cooperation was not optional if I wanted to avoid even more severe consequences. That evening, Linda Morrison orchestrated a family meeting in our formal dining room, complete with the good china and fresh flowers, as if we were celebrating rather than conducting an intervention. She had prepared a detailed presentation about my recent behavior, complete with a timeline of what she described as increasingly erratic incidents that demonstrated my inability to cope with adult responsibilities and family expectations. According to her carefully documented evidence, I had been skipping classes, neglecting my personal hygiene, displaying signs of paranoid thinking, and making wild accusations against family members without any basis in reality. Richard delivered the ultimatum with the calm precision of a judge pronouncing sentence in a courtroom. I had exactly 72 hours to make a public apology to Brooke and Harrison for my disruptive behavior, commit to attending the wedding as a supportive and enthusiastic member of the bridal party, and sign a written agreement to undergo psychological evaluation and treatment. If I failed to comply with any of these requirements, I would be immediately disinherited from the Morrison estate. My college tuition would be permanently withdrawn, and I would be permanently banned from any contact with family members or family business associates. The psychological pressure reached its peak when they physically locked me in my childhood bedroom, removing my cell phone, laptop, and car keys while posting Marcus Webb outside my window to ensure I couldn't escape to seek help from anyone outside the family. The bedroom that had once been my sanctuary became a prison cell, complete with meals delivered on a tray and supervised bathroom breaks that made me feel like a dangerous mental patient rather than a college student trying to prevent a catastrophic mistake. Brooke visited me during my confinement, playing the role of a concerned older sister while actually delivering the cruelest psychological torture I had ever experienced. She sat on the edge of my bed with fake tears in her eyes, explaining how much it hurt her to see me destroying myself with jealousy and resentment. According to her twisted narrative, she had always tried to be a good sister to me, but I had responded to her love and support with nothing but bitterness and spite. She even had the audacity to suggest that my obsession with Benjamin was the real issue, claiming that I was trying to sabotage her happiness because I couldn't accept that he had chosen her over me. The most chilling moment of our conversation came when Brooke dropped her mask of sisterly concern and revealed the calculating predator beneath the surface. She confessed that she had been planning this elaborate scheme for over 2 years, carefully positioning herself to steal both my boyfriend and my family's inheritance while maintaining her image as the perfect daughter. She described in detail how she had manipulated Benjamin's feelings, exploited Harrison's trust, and played our parents like instruments in an orchestra she conducted with masterful precision. Her final words before leaving my room were a promise that if I continued to resist their plans, she would make sure I disappeared permanently from the Morrison family story. Just when I thought my situation couldn't become any more desperate, Emma Martinez appeared at my window in the middle of the night, climbing the old oak tree we had used for secret adventures during our high school years. She had tears streaming down her face as she apologized for doubting me and explained that she had finally seen through my mother's manipulation campaign. Emma confessed that she had been struggling with guilt over abandoning our friendship, especially after witnessing something that confirmed every suspicion I had shared with her about Brooke's deception and the family's conspiracy against me. Emma's revelation came in the form of a shocking eyewitness account that validated my worst fears about the depth of Brooke's betrayal. She had been driving home from her part-time job at a high-end boutique when she spotted Brooke and Benjamin together in the parking garage beneath the Ritz-Carlton downtown. They were so absorbed in their passionate embrace that they never noticed Emma's car parked just a few spaces away, giving her a clear view of their intimate conversation about finalizing their escape plans and accessing Harrison's offshore accounts after the wedding ceremony. We spent the next several hours developing a strategy to gather irrefutable evidence of Brooke's infidelity and the family's fraudulent business practices. Emma had always been the more technically minded of our friendship duo, and she suggested using her high-quality camera equipment to document Brooke and Benjamin's secret meetings. Our plan required careful timing and coordination, but we believed that video evidence would be impossible for even my manipulative family to explain away or dismiss as the fabrications of an unstable mind. The night before the wedding rehearsal dinner, Emma and I positioned ourselves in her car across from the luxury hotel where Brooke had been meeting Benjamin for their final romantic rendezvous before her marriage to Harrison. We had been waiting for over 3 hours when they finally appeared, walking hand in hand toward the hotel entrance like any other couple planning a romantic evening together. Emma's camera captured everything in crystal clear detail: their passionate kisses, their intimate touches, and most importantly, their detailed discussion about the fake identification documents and offshore bank transfers that would allow them to disappear with Harrison's money. The video footage was even more damning than we had hoped, providing clear evidence not only of Brooke's infidelity but also of her elaborate plans to commit fraud and theft against her unsuspecting husband. Benjamin could be heard describing the specific steps they would take to access Harrison's personal accounts, transfer funds to their Mexican bank accounts, and establish new identities in a country without extradition treaties. Brooke responded with excited laughter and detailed suggestions for covering their tracks and avoiding detection by law enforcement agencies. Emma and I returned to her apartment that night feeling triumphant and vindicated, finally possessing the proof we needed to expose the truth and save Harrison from becoming the victim of an elaborate con game. We spent hours planning our strategy for revealing the evidence at the most effective moment, debating whether to approach Harrison directly or find a way to expose the conspiracy publicly during the wedding ceremony itself. Emma suggested creating multiple copies of the video and distributing them to ensure that the truth would come out even if my family tried to suppress or destroy the evidence. However, when I woke up the next morning in Emma's guest bedroom, I discovered that my best friend had betrayed me in the most devastating way possible. She was sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop open, and I could see my father's contact information displayed on her screen alongside a freshly sent email attachment. Emma looked up at me with guilt written across her face as she confessed that she had sent a copy of our surveillance video directly to Richard Morrison, along with a detailed report of our activities and plans. The truth about Emma's loyalty came pouring out in a flood of tears and apologies that felt like acid being poured on an open wound. She explained that my father had approached her weeks earlier, offering her $10,000 to monitor my activities and report any attempts I might make to interfere with the wedding or expose family secrets. Emma had been struggling with her own financial problems, facing the possibility of dropping out of college due to unpaid tuition bills, and Richard's offer had seemed like a gift from heaven. The most shocking revelation was that Richard Morrison had known about Brooke's affair with Benjamin from the very beginning, and had actually encouraged their relationship as part of a larger conspiracy to defraud the Blackwood family. Emma had unwittingly provided my father with exactly the evidence he needed to blackmail Harrison after the wedding, giving him leverage to extract even more money and business concessions than the original marriage contract had specified. My own investigation had played directly into his hands, providing him with professional quality documentation of the very crimes he had orchestrated. Emma's final confession was that Richard had never intended to allow the marriage to proceed without complications. His plan was to let Brooke and Harrison exchange vows, wait for the business merger to be finalized and the money to change hands, then reveal the evidence of Brooke's infidelity to destroy Harrison emotionally while simultaneously using it to blackmail him into signing over additional assets. I realized that I had been nothing more than an unwitting pawn in a game that was far more complex and cruel than I had ever imagined, and that everyone I trusted had been working against me from the beginning. Armed with the devastating knowledge that even my closest friend had betrayed me for money, I made the desperate decision to confront my father directly in his corporate office, hoping that a face-to-face conversation in his professional environment might finally force him to reveal the full scope of his criminal enterprise. Richard Morrison's office occupied the entire top floor of a gleaming downtown skyscraper, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city he had spent decades learning to manipulate and control. He was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk when I burst through his secretary's protests, and his reaction to my unexpected appearance confirmed that he had been expecting this confrontation for some time. Richard didn't even pretend to be surprised by my accusations about Emma's betrayal or my knowledge of his involvement in Brooke's affair. Instead, he leaned back in his leather chair with the satisfied expression of a chess master who had just achieved checkmate against an overmatched opponent. He calmly confirmed that he had been orchestrating every detail of the wedding conspiracy from the beginning, including Brooke's relationship with Benjamin, my discovery of their affair, and even my desperate attempts to gather evidence and expose the truth. The real plan was so much more elaborate and cruel than anything I had imagined in my worst nightmares. Richard explained that he had been studying the Blackwood family's business operations and personal finances for over 5 years, identifying their vulnerabilities and developing strategies to exploit their wealth and influence. The marriage between Brooke and Harrison was just the opening move in a long-term campaign designed to gradually transfer the Blackwood fortune into Morrison control through a combination of legal manipulation, emotional blackmail, and carefully orchestrated betrayals. My father had selected Benjamin Carter specifically for his role in the conspiracy, recruiting him from foster care as a teenager and grooming him to become the perfect instrument for destroying relationships and manipulating emotions. Benjamin's romantic pursuit of me had been a training exercise designed to test his abilities and establish his credibility as someone capable of genuinely caring about the Morrison family. When Richard decided that Benjamin was ready for more advanced operations, he had ordered him to seduce Brooke and prepare her for the complex psychological manipulation that would be required to make the plan succeed. Linda Morrison's role in the conspiracy was revealed to be even more sinister than I had suspected, as Richard described her talent for psychological warfare and emotional manipulation. She had been systematically programming Brooke since childhood to believe that her value as a person depended entirely on her ability to marry into wealth and status, creating the perfect weapon for infiltrating and destroying other wealthy families from within. My mother's campaign against my credibility and mental health was just the latest example of skills she had been developing and refining for decades. The conversation took an even more ominous turn when Richard explained that my resistance to their plans had actually been beneficial to their overall strategy, providing them with additional leverage and credibility when they eventually revealed Brooke's infidelity to Harrison. My desperate attempts to expose the truth would be presented as evidence of family dysfunction and psychological instability, making Harrison more likely to believe that Brooke had been driven into Benjamin's arms by her toxic family environment rather than recognizing her actions as part of a calculated conspiracy. Richard's threats became increasingly explicit as he described the consequences I would face if I continued to interfere with his plans. He had already arranged for me to be involuntarily committed to a private psychiatric facility, where I would undergo treatment for my delusional thinking and paranoid accusations against family members. The facility was located in a remote area of Montana, far from any friends or potential allies, and patients there typically remained under care for months or even years while their families managed their affairs and made decisions about their treatment. The most chilling aspect of our conversation was Richard's calm description of how my mental health crisis would be used to justify transferring my inheritance and trust funds to Brooks' control, effectively erasing me from the Morrison family legacy while providing additional resources for their criminal enterprises. He had already consulted with lawyers and psychiatrists who would testify that I was incompetent to manage my own affairs, and my documented history of making false accusations against family members would provide compelling evidence for their case. As our confrontation reached its climax, Richard called building security to have me removed from his office and escorted back home, where Linda was waiting with a team of private medical professionals who had been hired to evaluate my mental state and recommend appropriate treatment. I realized that I was running out of time and options, trapped in a web of legal and medical manipulation that would be almost impossible to escape once their plan was fully implemented. My family had turned my own love and concern for Harrison into a weapon that would be used to destroy both of us, and there seemed to be no way to warn him without confirming their narrative about my mental instability. The final blow came that evening when I overheard Richard and Linda discussing their plans for my permanent removal from their lives. They spoke with casual indifference about the psychiatric facility in Montana, describing it as a convenient solution that would keep me safely contained while they completed their takeover of the Blackwood fortune. Linda even expressed relief that they would finally be free from my disruptive influence and able to focus on more important family business without worrying about my interference or emotional outbursts. My escape from the Morrison mansion required every ounce of cunning and desperation I could muster, as I realized that this might be my last opportunity to expose the truth before being permanently silenced in a psychiatric facility. I waited until the early hours of the morning, then began displaying symptoms of severe food poisoning, complete with convincing retching sounds and claims of intense abdominal pain that sent Linda into a panic about potential liability if I became seriously ill while under her supervision. When she called the family doctor to make an emergency house call, I used the confusion and distraction to slip out through the service entrance that connected to the kitchen garden. My first destination was the downtown law office of Jake Reynolds, a former Morrison family attorney who had been dismissed by my father 3 years earlier after refusing to participate in what he described as ethically questionable business practices. Jake had always been kind to me during family legal meetings, and I hoped that his professional conscience might make him willing to help me expose the criminal conspiracy that was about to destroy both the Morrison and Blackwood families. His office was located in a modest building that stood in stark contrast to my father's gleaming corporate headquarters, but it represented the first honest legal advice I had received in months. Jake's reaction to my story was a mixture of shock, anger, and grim vindication of his previous suspicions about Richard Morrison's business methods. He revealed that his dismissal from the Morrison legal team had resulted from his refusal to help structure fraudulent real estate transactions and offshore money laundering operations that violated both federal and state laws. Jake had suspected that Richard was planning something dramatic to save his failing business empire, but he never imagined that the conspiracy would involve manipulating marriages and destroying innocent people's lives. The evidence I provided about Brooks' affair and the planned fraud against Harrison was exactly what Jake needed to build a compelling case against my family's criminal enterprise. He explained that Richard's real estate empire had been built on a foundation of illegal activities including money laundering, tax evasion, bribery of public officials, and fraudulent manipulation of property values through insider information and market manipulation. The Blackwood marriage was just the latest and most ambitious example of Richard's willingness to exploit personal relationships for financial gain. Jake and I spent the entire day developing a comprehensive strategy for exposing the conspiracy and protecting both Harrison and myself from further harm. Our plan required careful coordination and precise timing, as we would have only one opportunity to present our evidence before Richard and Linda could implement their counterattack. Jake suggested that we approach Harrison directly with our evidence, hoping that his business experience and legal resources would provide us with the support we needed to bring criminal charges against the Morrison family. The meeting with Harrison Blackwood took place in a private conference room at Jake's office, where we presented him with video evidence, financial documents, and detailed testimony about the conspiracy that threatened to destroy his life and fortune. Harrison's initial reaction was complete disbelief and denial, as he struggled to accept that the woman he loved and planned to marry was actually a skilled predator who had been programmed to exploit his emotions and steal his wealth. However, as we walked him through the evidence step by step, his businessman's instincts began to recognize the sophisticated nature of the fraud that had been perpetrated against him. The most shocking revelation came when Harrison confessed that he had already begun to suspect something was wrong with his relationship with Brooke, particularly her reluctance to discuss their future plans in detail and her insistence on keeping separate financial accounts even after their marriage. He had actually hired his own private investigator to conduct background checks on the Morrison family, and the preliminary findings had raised several red flags about Richard's business practices and the family's true financial situation. Our alliance was cemented when Harrison revealed the contents of his investigator's report, which documented numerous instances of fraudulent activity and criminal behavior that corroborated everything Jake and I had discovered through our own research. However, our moment of triumph was shattered when Benjamin Carter appeared in the conference room doorway, having somehow gained access to the building and overheard enough of our conversation to understand the threat we posed to the Morrison conspiracy. Benjamin's presence in that room represented the most dangerous complication our investigation could have faced, as he possessed intimate knowledge of both the conspiracy and our efforts to expose it. His appearance also confirmed my worst fears about the extent of the surveillance network that Richard had established to monitor and control everyone involved in his criminal enterprise. The look in Benjamin's eyes told me that our time was running out, and that the final confrontation between truth and deception was about to begin in earnest. Benjamin Carter's appearance in Jake's conference room should have been the moment when our carefully planned expose collapsed in failure, but instead it became the turning point that finally gave us the evidence we needed to bring down the entire Morrison criminal enterprise. Benjamin looked exhausted and haunted, his usual confident demeanor replaced by the desperate expression of someone who had been carrying an unbearable burden for far too long. Instead of threatening us or demanding that we abandon our investigation, he closed the door behind him and asked if he could tell us the whole truth about Richard Morrison's operations and his own unwilling role in the conspiracy. The story that poured out of Benjamin over the next 2 hours was so shocking and comprehensive that even Jake, with his extensive experience in criminal law, found himself struggling to process the scope of the crimes that had been committed. Benjamin revealed that he was not just an accomplice in Richard's schemes but actually a victim who had been systematically groomed and manipulated since his recruitment from foster care at the age of 15. Richard had specifically sought out vulnerable young men with no family connections or support systems, offering them education, housing, and a path to success in exchange for their absolute loyalty and willingness to participate in increasingly complex criminal operations. Benjamin's training had included not only romantic manipulation techniques but also advanced skills in financial fraud, identity theft, and psychological warfare that made him an invaluable asset to Richard's criminal organization. He had been responsible for infiltrating and destroying at least 6 other wealthy families over the past decade, using his charm and intelligence to gain access to their financial resources and personal secrets before systematically transferring their wealth to Richard's control. The most devastating revelation was Benjamin's confession that he had genuinely fallen in love with me during our relationship, and that his feelings for me had made him question the morality of the criminal enterprise he had been trained to serve. Richard had discovered Benjamin's emotional attachment and had deliberately ordered him to seduce Brooke as both punishment for his disloyalty and a test of his continued usefulness to the organization. Benjamin's relationship with Brooke had been purely professional from his perspective, designed to provide Richard with leverage over the Blackwood family while simultaneously destroying my trust and emotional stability. Benjamin produced a portable hard drive containing comprehensive documentation of Richard's criminal activities spanning the previous 15 years, including detailed financial records, recorded conversations, photographs, and video evidence of crimes ranging from fraud and money laundering to extortion and conspiracy. He explained that he had been secretly gathering this evidence for months, planning to disappear with enough proof to bring down the entire organization while protecting himself through witness protection programs. Jake Reynolds immediately recognized the significance of Benjamin's evidence, confirming that the documentation would be sufficient to support federal charges against Richard Morrison and dozens of his associates and accomplices. The evidence also revealed the extent of Linda Morrison's involvement in the criminal enterprise, documenting her role in psychological manipulation campaigns that had driven several victims to suicide and mental breakdown over the years. Our strategy session was interrupted by an urgent phone call from Harrison's security team, warning us that Morrison operatives had been spotted near the law office and that our location had been compromised. We had less than an hour to finalize our plans and get the evidence into the hands of federal law enforcement before Richard's people could neutralize us or destroy the documentation that threatened his entire criminal empire. The plan we developed was audacious in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. Harrison would proceed with the wedding ceremony as scheduled, but instead of exchanging vows with Brooke, he would use the occasion to publicly expose the Morrison conspiracy in front of hundreds of guests, media representatives, and law enforcement officials who would be strategically positioned throughout the venue. Benjamin would simultaneously deliver his evidence to FBI agents who were already investigating Richard's business operations, while Jake filed federal charges and requested immediate arrest warrants for all the primary conspirators. My role in the plan was perhaps the most dangerous, as I would need to return to the Morrison mansion and maintain the illusion that I was still under their control while secretly coordinating with our allies to ensure that justice was finally served. The success of our operation depended on precise timing and flawless execution, as any mistake could result in the evidence being destroyed and all of us disappearing permanently under Richard's supervision. The final preparation for our counterattack came when Benjamin handed me a small recording device and explained how to use it to capture any additional confessions or threats from my family members. He also gave me an encrypted cell phone that would allow me to maintain contact with Jake and Harrison without being detected by Richard's surveillance network. As we prepared to leave Jake's office and put our plan into motion, Benjamin looked me in the eyes and apologized for every moment of pain he had caused me, promising that he would spend the rest of his life trying to make amends for the damage he had inflicted while under Richard's control. The wedding day arrived with all the pageantry and elegance that Linda Morrison had spent months orchestrating, completely unaware that her carefully planned social triumph was about to become the stage for the most spectacular criminal expose in Beverly Hills history. I returned home that morning playing the role of the defeated daughter who had finally accepted her family's supremacy, apologizing to Brooke for my previous behavior and asking if I could still participate in the ceremony as a gesture of sisterly support and family unity. Richard and Linda were so pleased with my apparent surrender that they failed to notice the small recording device hidden in my bridesmaid bouquet or the encrypted phone concealed in my makeup kit. They welcomed me back into the family fold with condescending forgiveness, treating my capitulation as proof that their psychological manipulation techniques were more effective than outright force in controlling rebellious family members. The morning preparations took place in Brooke's suite at the Blackwood family's private estate, where she was surrounded by professional stylists, photographers, and wedding planners who were creating the perfect fairy tale atmosphere for what they believed would be the social event of the season. Brooke confided in me about her excitement for the new life she would begin with Harrison, apparently having convinced herself that her feelings for him were genuine despite her continued plans to betray and rob him. The most chilling moment came when Linda pulled me aside during the pre-ceremony photography session to deliver what she clearly intended as a final warning about my future behavior and attitude. She explained in precise detail how my mental health episode would be handled if I ever again displayed signs of instability or disloyalty to family interests. The psychiatric facility in Montana was still waiting for my arrival, and any future problems with my behavior would result in immediate and permanent commitment under medical supervision that could last for decades. Richard's confidence in his ultimate victory was evident during our brief conversation in the mansion's library, where he outlined his post-wedding plans for expanding the criminal enterprise into new markets and target demographics. He described the Blackwood marriage as a template that could be replicated with other wealthy families, using Brooke's success as proof of concept for a larger operation that would systematically infiltrate and exploit America's social elite. The wedding ceremony itself was a masterpiece of deceptive theater, with Brooke looking absolutely radiant in her designer gown while Benjamin watched from the audience with the other Morrison family associates. Harrison played his role as the devoted groom perfectly, giving no indication that he knew about the conspiracy or had any plans beyond exchanging vows with his beautiful bride. The moment arrived when the officiant asked if anyone present had any reason why the marriage should not proceed, and the silence that followed seemed to confirm Richard's triumph. However, instead of proceeding with the traditional vows, Harrison took a step back from Brooke and addressed the assembled guests with a calm voice that carried clearly throughout the decorated garden venue. He announced that he had discovered evidence of criminal conspiracy involving the Morrison family, and that the wedding ceremony would not be proceeding as planned. As Harrison spoke, FBI agents who had been positioned among the catering staff and security personnel began moving toward Richard, Linda, and their key associates. The chaos that erupted was unlike anything I had ever witnessed, as Richard's carefully constructed facade of respectability collapsed in real time before hundreds of witnesses and multiple television cameras that had been invited to document the social event. Brooke's reaction was perhaps the most dramatic, as she screamed accusations at Harrison while simultaneously trying to flee the scene in her elaborate wedding gown, only to be intercepted by federal agents who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Benjamin's arrest was conducted with surprising gentleness, as his cooperation with the investigation had earned him consideration for witness protection rather than the harsh prosecution that awaited the other conspirators. He was led away in handcuffs, but his expression showed relief rather than despair, as if a tremendous burden had finally been lifted from his shoulders. The media coverage of the Morrison conspiracy became a national sensation, dominating headlines for weeks as additional victims came forward and the full scope of Richard's criminal empire was revealed to the public. I found myself at the center of the story, simultaneously portrayed as both a brave whistleblower who had exposed a dangerous criminal enterprise and a damaged family member who had betrayed her own relatives for personal reasons. The legal proceedings stretched on for months, with Richard, Linda, and Brooke all facing serious federal charges that could result in decades in prison. The Morrison family assets were frozen pending the outcome of the trials, leaving me in the unusual position of being both wealthy on paper and completely broke in practical terms, as I had no access to funds for legal representation or basic living expenses. Harrison Blackwood emerged from the scandal with his reputation and fortune intact, having been clearly identified as a victim rather than a participant in the conspiracy. His support during the legal proceedings was invaluable, as he provided both financial resources and emotional encouragement during the darkest moments of the investigation and prosecution process. One full year after that devastating wedding day, I stood in my cap and gown at the University of Oregon graduation ceremony, having completed my degree with highest honors despite transferring schools and financing my education entirely through student loans and part-time employment. The journey from privileged Beverly Hills princess to independent young woman supporting herself had been more challenging than I ever imagined, but it had also been the most authentic and meaningful experience of my life. My father, Richard Morrison, was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison after being convicted on charges including conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The judge described his crimes as representing a particularly callous exploitation of human emotions and family relationships for financial gain, noting that his actions had caused psychological damage that would last far longer than any monetary losses his victims had suffered. Linda Morrison received an 8-year sentence after cooperating with prosecutors and providing testimony about the psychological manipulation techniques that had been used against both victims and accomplices throughout the criminal enterprise. Her cooperation had been motivated more by self-preservation than genuine remorse, but it provided valuable insight into the methods used by white-collar criminals to control and exploit their targets. Brooke's case had been the most complex to resolve, as prosecutors struggled to determine whether she should be treated as a victim of lifelong psychological manipulation or as an adult accomplice who had made conscious choices to participate in criminal activities. She ultimately received a suspended sentence and 5 years of probation, along with mandatory psychological counseling and community service requirements that would help her develop legitimate job skills and healthy relationship patterns. Benjamin Carter had entered the Witness Protection Program after providing testimony that led to the conviction of not only the Morrison family but also dozens of other criminals who had participated in Richard's network of fraudulent operations. I received a letter from him through the federal marshal's office, expressing his gratitude for my forgiveness and his determination to build a new life based on honesty and genuine relationships rather than manipulation and deception. My relationship with Harrison Blackwood had evolved into a deep friendship based on mutual respect and shared experience of surviving trauma together. He had become a mentor and ally in my new career as a victim advocate, helping me establish a non-profit organization that provided support services for people who had been targeted by financial fraud and family manipulation schemes. His business connections and philanthropic experience had been invaluable in building an organization that could actually make a difference in people's lives. Jake Reynolds had become more than just my attorney. He was now my business partner and surrogate father figure, providing guidance and wisdom as I navigated the complex world of victim advocacy and criminal justice reform. His law firm had expanded to include a division specializing in family fraud cases, and we worked together to help other victims escape from situations similar to what I had experienced with my own family. The most significant personal growth had come through my work with Dr. Sarah Chen, a therapist who specialized in family trauma and psychological abuse recovery. Through our sessions, I had learned to recognize the patterns of manipulation and control that had shaped my entire childhood, and more importantly, I had developed the emotional tools necessary to build healthy relationships based on trust and mutual respect rather than fear and obligation. The unexpected phone call from Brooke on my 25th birthday had been the first contact between us since the trial, and it led to a cautious reconciliation that acknowledged both the harm she had caused and the circumstances that had shaped her behavior. She was working at a non-profit organization in Seattle, using her own experience with manipulation to help other women recognize and escape from abusive relationships. Our conversations were still difficult and sometimes painful, but they represented progress toward understanding and healing rather than the destructive patterns that had defined our family for so many years. My new relationship with David Martinez, a public defender who specialized in helping victims of white-collar crime, represented everything I had learned about the difference between healthy and toxic relationships. David treated me as an equal partner whose opinions and feelings mattered, never trying to control or manipulate me for his own benefit. Our relationship was built on honesty, respect, and genuine affection, qualities that had been completely absent from my family's version of love and loyalty. The most profound lesson I had learned was that sometimes the greatest act of courage is refusing to participate in a lie, even when that lie promises to keep your family together and provide financial security. The truth has its own power that can overcome even the most sophisticated manipulation and deception, but only if someone is willing to speak it regardless of the personal cost. Standing up to my family had cost me everything I thought I wanted, but it had given me everything I actually needed to build a life worth living. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have risked everything to expose the truth, or would you have stayed quiet to protect your family and your future? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I really want to hear your perspective on this whole crazy situation. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own family drama, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss these real-life stories that prove truth really can be stranger than fiction. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of this community where we support each other through life's biggest challenges. Remember that your voice matters, your truth matters, and sometimes speaking up is the bravest thing you can do, even when it feels like the whole world is against you.